Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So we had some news break this morning that John Tortorella had been fired by the Philadelphia Flyers. And the short and sweet of it, my personal take on this is that I never really liked the John Tortorella hire to begin with. Not because he's a bad coach, but the Flyers were clearly still trying to rebuild. Chuck Fletcher was kind of just grasping at straws, trying to save his job. That didn't work. Tortorella got a lot out of the team last year, but again, at the end of the day, they're just not really a talented bunch right now. And as a result, now they're moving on for maybe a more younger, newer coach that is maybe a little bit more player friendly, but that it parlays us into something I want to talk about today, and that is some other coaches and general managers that are on the hot seat because John Tortorella is not going to be the only guy that's going to get fired in the next month or so. There are going to be multiple heads rolling in the NHL in terms of the coaching and the general manager carousel. So we're going to go through it right now, and I'm going to give you my updated top 10 in terms of GM and coaching hot seat. This is my personal line. I'm not saying these guys are for sure going to get fired. It's just, in my opinion, who I think probably deserves to get fired. And I'll also say how likely it is because some of these guys, for some reason, have like insane job security. Yeah, let's get into it. We're going to start with some honorable mentions up first. Steve Yzerman, I wouldn't put him firmly on the hot seat right now. I think next year, if they're not in a playoff spot, then you seriously start to put him on that hot seat. They still have a lot of core pieces coming up and still developing, and they have shown positive signs in terms of Lucas Raymond taking steps, Edvinsson being a really good rookie guy. Next year, when they have some of their other guys at the NHL level, I need to see some serious progress, but it's more so that they overperformed last year, and that kind of set expectations this year a little bit too high. Still, a lot of pressure on Steve Yzerman. Don't think he should get fired right now. Pete DeBoer and Chris MacFarland, hear me out. This is obviously very playoff dependent because they're going to be playing each other in the first round. If the loser of this, the Dallas Stars head coach Pete DeBoer or the Colorado Avalanche's general manager Chris MacFarland, rightfully so, on a hot seat in my opinion. Pete DeBoer, he kind of is on a hot seat because he far exceeded the expectations in the first 2 years by making back-to-back Western Conference Finals. But Dallas is really going for it after that Mikko Rantanen trade. So if they go to back-to-back Western Conference Finals and lose in the first round, I don't think DeBoer is going to get fired, but then going into that season, he's definitely on the hot seat if they have a slow start or lose again in the first and second round. Next year, he's definitely going to get fired, as well as Chris MacFarland. Put a lot of chips in the middle on rentals. Guys like Brock Nelson, Ryan Lindgren, Charlie Coyle. I love the Blackwood deal, and Martin H has been very good for them. But if they lose in the first round after this, again, I don't think MacFarland's going to get fired. But if all those guys walk and you gave up a first, Richie, Zellers, a second, Middlestat, just for a first-round exit to the Dallas Stars, rightfully so. Colorado Avalanche fans are going to be pretty pissed. Again, those guys aren't on my top 10 quite yet. Got to see how the playoffs go for those two. Steve Yzerman, not till next year. Let's get into the top 10. And at number 10, I have Rick Tocchet. Magical season last year, but it was a little bit fluky, if we're going to be honest. Like, everybody had a career year and their PDO was off the charts. This year, it has come crashing down. The locker room has been in disarray. And I'm not saying it's all Rick Tocchet's fault, but he definitely has to take some accountability for this. They have just kind of been a mess ever since like mid-November. So yeah, Rick Tocchet definitely on the hot seat. I think he could potentially get fired this summer, and I wouldn't be shocked if he goes to the Philadelphia Flyers, a team that he played for a long team. Rick Tocchet checks in at number 10. Number 9, Lindy Ruff. After one season, it's just been such a brutal season. It's not even like Nashville Predators. I still think Andrew Brunette's a great coach. What he did in Florida when he was the head coach the one season, and then they won the President's Trophy, New Jersey. I don't know why I'm talking about Brunette so much, but I think Brunette's safe right now. But someone like Lindy Ruff, it's not unlikely. Like the Nashville Predators, they were just unlucky this season. Their underlying numbers are actually pretty solid. Buffalo Sabres just straight up stink. They have the 28th best expected goals percentage, 4th worst goals against in the NHL. The special teams are 27th for the power play and 22nd for the penalty kill. Andrew Brunette kind of made Lindy Ruff look good in New Jersey in that 2023 season. He just doesn't have it at this point in terms of coaching. And it wouldn't surprise me if Buffalo goes after a guy like John Tortorella, says, Lindy Ruff, we tried to go down the nostalgia route, make the fans feel good, reignite that history 20 years ago when you made some conference finals. But it's time to move on, and Lindy Ruff could potentially get fired, as well as potentially their general manager that we might be talking about later in this video. Number 8, Mike Sullivan. Don't think he's a bad coach, and I think someone would be wise to kind of scoop him, but I think in Pittsburgh, it just has been like a slow decline, and this year has by far been their worst year. And again, I'm not acting like they had these monster expectations, but I think at this point, he's been there for almost a decade. It's probably just time to move on. The system, the voice in the room, it's gotten stale. I'm not saying some different coach could take the Pittsburgh Penguins into the playoffs, but I wouldn't hate the idea of getting a younger coach that could develop that next core in terms of they're probably going to land like Michael Misa or Matthew Schaefer and then somehow get Gavin McKenna next year. Bring in a new coach, bring in a new voice. Not saying it's egregious if he doesn't get fired. And I mean, he survived the first month of the season, so he might not get fired. And he has an extension for like 2 years after this, but definitely on somewhat of a hot seat. Number 7, Rob Blake. Similarly to McFarland, DeBoer, really comes down to the playoffs. If he wins in the first round, beats Edmonton, gets over that hump that he hasn't been able to the last 3 years, probably keeps his job. But if he loses in the first round, 4 straight first round exits, even if it's in 6 or 7 games, it's an improvement compared to last year. I think you got to let him go. He's been the GM since 2019. He's done an okay job. For every good move, there's a bad move. He's drafted pretty solid. But again, it's just nothing special. This team is about at the same level that they were in 2022. So I think you got to move on from Rob Blake, even though he's a legendary, one of the greatest LA Kings of all time. It's probably time to move off Rob Blake. He's been the general manager since 2019. Snip, snip. They're probably going to lose to the Edmonton Oilers, and he's probably going to get fired. Now we're into the top 6, and these guys I think should all be fired, just regardless of results, and the results are obviously trending pretty bad. At number 6, Lou Lamoriello. Although in the past 10 months, the Islanders' future looks a lot better, I am happy with what has happened in the last 10 months in terms of drafting Yzerman, trading Brock Nelson for Richie, and a first-round pick. It's all relative. It was so bad in part because Lou Lamoriello blew up the entire future of this team the last couple of years and did not draft very well. So it's his fault. And now we went from the worst future the next 5 to 8 years to now just bad. It's not even that good. So Lou Lamoriello, he's going to be 83 at the start of next season. That is insane. I want a fresh face in there, not his son that's the AHL general manager, to come in and have a vision for a rebuild, retool for the next 3 to 5 years. I would not trust Lou Lamoriello at this point. Thank you for your service. Again, second most successful Islanders run of all time behind the dynasty, and it's not remotely close. So I appreciate Lou Lamoriello, but it's time to part ways. It's probably not going to happen. I wish it happened, but at least he has been thinking more so about the future with the Brock Nelson deal, and I think he's going to prioritize the future this summer if he is the general manager. At number 4 and number 5, I got a 2-pack. Peter Laviolette and Chris Drury. This is a 1-2 combo. I do blame Drury more because this summer he didn't deal with the Jacob Trouba situation. It ended up bleeding into the season. It became really nasty on top of trading Capo Caco for Carson Soucy and a 3rd and 6th round pick, then not Carson Soucy, Will Borgen, other Northwestern defenseman, Pacific Northwest defenseman. So he brought in Will Borgen for Capo Caco, gave him some 5-year deal at $4.1 million. Then when they were out of a playoff spot, traded for JT Miller. I know he has term after this, but gave up a first-round pick that might be 14th through 16th in this year's draft. Not saying this year's draft is killer, but that's a decently valuable pick, or next year it could be unprotected. At the deadline, the Ryan Lindgren traded him away, but then traded Riley Smith basically for Carson Soucy. Yeah, Drury, this team has just been very lackluster at 5-on-5 basically since 2022. He didn't address that, didn't fix that. So as a result, he deserves to get fired. But Laviolette is also at fault a decent amount, considering this team last year was a President's Trophy team, and most of it is the same core. And with Laviolette, the MO with Laviolette is usually has immediate success, comes in, changes things, but then teams figure him out relatively quick. And they have been so bad defensively to start the season, and now offensively, they've been averaging 18 shots a game their last 10 to 15 games. They're in a wild card race with the coming out of the rebuild Canadians and the New York Islanders that sold Brock Nelson. They should still easily be a playoff team in this year. It's unacceptable how bad they were. At one point, they had a 47% points percentage. It's been really bad. And again, the underlying numbers are also pretty bad for the New York Rangers. So both of these guys at this point, I think, do deserve to get fired. I'd clear house if I was the New York Rangers and bring in a new coach and a new general manager. The top 3 should be pretty consensus. At number 3, I got Kevin Adams. His tenure started off so promising. He got hired, I think, in 2020. And then in 2023, you saw the vision. They missed the playoffs by 1 point. Dylan Cousins, Tage Thompson were locked up at $14.2 million for the next 7 years. It was awesome. Then they had a down year. Then they had an even worse year. They've been dropping 8 points like the last 2 years. It's been really, really bad. I know he has tough ownership that he has to deal with. Can't fully like spend to the cap at times, but his draft picks haven't really exactly been home runs as of right now. It's just not good for Kevin Adams, and I think it was really highlighted by that Dylan Cousins for Josh Norris trade. Not saying Buffalo has 1,000% lost that trade, but it's so Buffalo that they traded away Dylan Cousins. He has 8 points in 9 games with Ottawa, who's going to safely make the playoffs at this point. And then Josh Norris plays 3 games, he gets hurt immediately. So that puts a little bow on Kevin Adams' last 2 years as the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres. It's a brutal job to have, but yeah, I think at this point, probably going to get fired. Number 2, Don Sweeney. When looking at Don Sweeney, that 2024 unrestricted free agency class was a disaster. They let Jake DeBrusk go and gave $2.25 million to Elias Lindholm. Jake DeBrusk has just been straight up better than Lindholm, and I don't even hate the idea of not re-signing DeBrusk. But yeah, that they used that money for Lindholm. He's been god-awful, arguably the worst contract in the NHL. Zadorov isn't exactly killing it and has 5 years left and is 30 years old. Swayman negotiations went brutally, dragged out almost into the season, and now he hasn't been remotely worth that. You traded Olmark, which was your leverage, and then Swayman, rightfully so, was like, you got to pay me all this money, and now he hasn't been remotely worth that money. It's been bad. I liked his deadline, but again, they had cup expectations going into this season, so as a result, he deserves to get fired. I don't think he's going to get fired if they allowed him to trade away Brad Marchand, Brendan Carlo, Charlie Coyle. I think they're probably going to keep him on as general manager, but rightfully so. He deserves to get fired. He's a safe top 2 guy. And then number 1, I'm going with Ron Francis, similarly to Don Sweeney. Pretty bad free agency class this summer. Chandler Stevenson he's on pace for like 55 points, but his underlying expected goals numbers are like some of the worst at 5-on-5 in the entire NHL. Do not foresee that contract aging that well. Montour's been like and top pair offensive defenseman on pace for like 40 to 45 points. Nothing special defensively. He has 6 more years at $7.1 million. He obviously signed the worst goalie contract of the 2020s when he gave Grubauer a 6 by 5.9, somehow even worse than Jack Campbell, in my opinion, just because it's extra year and almost $1 million more. So that was the disaster. They made the playoffs. You could argue Don Sweeney number 1, but I think Don Sweeney has had some success. He's been the general manager of that team in 2019, of division winners, of the greatest regular season team of all time. Ron Francis, that 2023 kind of fluky year. They were not like a legit threat that season, although they did beat the Colorado Avalanche. But again, that was with Valerie Nichushkin leaving mid-series. Yeah, they had that great year, and that kind of tricked Ron Francis into thinking that his team was legit. They weren't close. Now they're going to put up, what are they on pace for right now? Like 77 points. It's bad in Seattle, and he hasn't exactly killed the draft. Again, a lot of his draft picks are still very young, but Matty Beniers, we thought was going to be a stud. We thought we were going to be a Ron Francis dominant 2-way center. He's stalled out offensively. Shane Wright's back on track, but again, you picked him 4th overall. You expected him to be at this point right now. It's been encouraging, but just because the first year or two was so bad. And on top of that, the Bjorkstrand and Gord deals were good. Similarly to Don Sweeney, had a really good deadline as a seller. But after spending all that money this offseason, you expect it to be a highly competitive team, not like a contender, but to make the playoffs potentially this season. The fact they're not competing with teams like the St. Louis Blues, Calgary Flames, Utah Hockey Club, it's simply unacceptable. And as a result, Ron Francis got to go. He got to go. And it's not like he was that good in Carolina at the end there. So, yeah, and immediately Don Waddell came in and flipped things right off the bat. So, yeah, I think Ron Francis is my number 1. Number 1, Ron Francis, Don Sweeney, Kevin Adams, Chris Drury, Peter Laviolette, Lou Lamoriello, Rob Blake, Mike Sullivan, Lindy Ruff, and Rick Tocchet. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about my top 10 coaches and general managers on the hot seat? Who would you have on your personal hot seat? I'll be seeing you in the next one. Peace.